You've been studying English for years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe longer than you want to admit. You know the grammar rules, you've read books in English, you watch shows, you understand almost everything. And yet, the moment someone asks you a question in English, something happens. Your mind goes blank, your heart speeds up. And the words you know you have, they just disappear. So what is going on? Today I'm going to tell you the truth. And it might be the most important thing you've ever heard about learning English. It's not your vocabulary, it's not your grammar, it's something much deeper than that, okay? Let's get into this. I want you to think about a moment, a specific moment. Maybe it happened to you at work or at a party or in a shop in another country. A moment when someone spoke to you in English and you knew the answer. You knew it. It was right there. But instead of speaking, you kind of froze. You smiled. You nodded. Maybe you said something like, yes, yes, or sorry, I don't understand, even though you did understand. And afterward, you felt this mix of frustration and embarrassment. Like, why did I do that? I knew exactly what to say. That moment, that's not a language problem. That's a psychology problem. And today we are going to break it down completely. Part 1. The lie you've been told about fluency. Here's the thing that most English teachers, good teachers, well-meaning teachers, never tell you. Fluency is not about knowledge. Fluency is about access. Those are two completely different things. Knowledge means you have the words somewhere in your brain. Access means you can actually reach them in real time, under pressure, when someone is standing in front of you waiting for a response. You can have enormous knowledge and terrible access. And that's exactly what's happening to millions of English learners around the world right now. They study and study and study. They build this massive library of vocabulary and grammar inside their heads, and then they open their mouth and the library locks itself. Why? Because accessing language under social pressure requires a different kind of brain state than studying language alone in your room. And nobody teaches you how to get into that state, so let me teach you. Right now, today. Part 2. What actually happens in your brain. When you freeze. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is basically your brain's alarm system. Its job is to detect threats, physical threats, emotional threats, social threats. And when it detects one, it does something very specific. It sends a signal that says, danger, shut non-essential systems down. And here's the brutal part. Language production is considered a non-essential system in a threat response. So when you're in a conversation in English and your brain perceives social danger, the fear of sounding stupid, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of being judged, your amygdala fires. And your access to language gets cut, not your knowledge, your access. This is called the affective filter. It was described by a linguist called Stephen Krashen back in the 1980s, and it's one of the most important ideas in all of language learning. When your emotional state is threatened, when you feel anxious, embarrassed, or under pressure, a filter comes down, and even if the words are there, they can't get through. This is why you can speak English perfectly when you're alone, talking to yourself, or joking around with close friends who don't judge you. And then sound like you know 12 words when someone important is listening. It's not you, it's your amygdala. But here's the good news. You can work with it. Part 3. The translation trap. Okay, so let's talk about one of the biggest psychological blocks, and honestly, the most common one, the translation trap. Most learners, even advanced ones, do this. They think in their first language, translate the sentence into English in their head, check it, edit it, and then say it. Sounds logical, right? Like a sensible process. But here's the problem. That process takes around 3 to 5 seconds. And in a real conversation, 3 to 5 seconds of silence while you think feels like forever. It creates pressure. The other person starts looking at you differently. You feel that. Your amygdala fires, the filter comes down, and now you can't even finish the sentence you were building. So the translation habit doesn't just slow you down, it actively creates the anxiety that shuts you down. It's a trap. And the more stressed you get, the deeper into the trap you go. Now, here's what no one tells you. The solution is not to think faster. The solution is to stop thinking in that direction entirely. Native speakers don't translate. They don't construct sentences and check them before speaking. They reach for patterns, chunks of language, phrases, structures they've heard and used hundreds of times, and they string those patterns together in real time. Fluency is pattern access, not translation speed. This is why people who watch a lot of English content, who listen to a lot of English, who immerse themselves, even passively, often speak better than people who study grammar intensively, because immersion builds patterns, grammar study builds rules. And in the middle of a real conversation, you don't have time to apply rules. You need patterns. So the first shift is this. Stop trying to think in English. Start trying to feel in English. Start reaching for phrases, not words, chunks, not grammar structures. And that shift, when it happens, feels like a door opening. Part 4. The Story of Sarah. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is not a real person, but she represents a pattern I've seen again and again. Sarah studied English for 7 years. She was, by any objective measure, a strong B2 learner. She understood everything. She read novels in English. She watched films without subtitles. But she had never, not once, had a real conversation in English without planning it in advance. At work, she would draft her emails 3 times before sending. In meetings with English-speaking clients, she stayed quiet unless directly addressed. At conferences, she avoided the coffee break conversations because the small talk felt impossible to plan for. She said to me, "In my head, I'm fluent. The moment I open my mouth, I become a beginner." Sound familiar? Sarah's problem was not English. Sarah's problem was that she had spent 7 years building English as a reading and listening skill, a passive, private, safe skill, and had almost never practiced it as a social, live, unpredictable skill. Those are different things, and treating them as the same thing is one of the most common mistakes in language learning. So what happened with Sarah? She started doing something uncomfortable every day, something small. She would call a shop, or ask a stranger for directions, or speak to a colleague she didn't know well, in English. Just one thing, 1 minute, every day. And she said the first 2 weeks were agony. She hung up before people answered. She prepared her sentences for 10 minutes before a 30-second call. She made mistakes that embarrassed her. But here's what happened at week 3. Her amygdala started getting bored, because the thing about threat responses is that they're triggered by the unfamiliar. Once something becomes familiar, once your brain has enough data to say this situation is not dangerous, the alarm stops firing. By week 6, Sarah was having spontaneous conversations without preparation, not because her English got better, because her brain stopped treating English conversations as emergencies. That's the psychology of fluency. Part 5. The Perfectionism Prison. All right, let's talk about something that might be uncomfortable to hear. Perfectionism is killing your English. And I say this with complete understanding because perfectionism in language learning comes from a beautiful place. It comes from caring, from wanting to communicate well, to be respected, to not embarrass yourself. Those are good instincts, but perfectionism, taken too far, creates what psychologists call a performance paradox. The more desperately you want to speak perfectly, the worse you speak. Here's why. When you set an internal standard of, I must sound like a native speaker or I should not speak at all, you create a gap between your current ability and your required ability. And every time you open your mouth, you're acutely aware of that gap. You hear your own accent, you notice the word you couldn't quite find, you replay the mistake after the conversation, and over time, this self-monitoring behavior becomes automatic. It runs in the background of every English interaction you have. It takes up cognitive space, space that should be used for, actually finding the words. The perfectionists I've spoken to describe speaking English as exhausting. And it is, because they're doing two things at once, speaking and judging themselves for speaking. Now, I want to give you a specific mindset shift that changes this. Think about a small child learning to walk. The child falls constantly. Falls, gets up, falls, gets up. And here's the thing. The child does not, after falling, sit down and give a critical evaluation of their performance. They don't think, I fell in front of everyone. My balance is clearly inadequate. Perhaps I should wait until I can walk perfectly before attempting to walk again. They just get up and try again and fall again and try again. Fluency works exactly the same way. Mistakes are not signs of failure. They are the mechanism of progress. Every mistake your brain makes and then self-corrects is literally building a new neural pathway. You are not failing when you make a grammar mistake in English. You are building. The shift is this. Go from I must not make mistakes to I am learning through mistakes, not as a nice thing to say to yourself, as a factual description of how language acquisition works. And when you make that shift, even just a little, you will notice your fluency increase almost immediately. Because you've freed up all that cognitive space from self-monitoring, and suddenly the words have room to come. Part 6, the identity problem. Okay, this one is deep, and it might be the most important thing I say today. Your brain has a self-concept, a story it tells about who you are, and somewhere in that story, consciously or not, there might be a line that says, I am not an English speaker. Maybe it's not that explicit. Maybe it's more like, English is something I'm learning, something I'm working on, something I'm not there yet with. And here's the psychological problem with that framing. Your brain is very loyal to its self-concept. It works constantly to maintain consistency between who it thinks you are and how you behave in the world. This is called cognitive consistency. So if your self-concept says, I am not an English speaker, your brain will automatically, unconsciously, find ways to confirm that story. When you speak English and stumble, your brain says, see, not an English speaker. When you understand everything but freeze when speaking, your brain says, right, not a speaker. When you avoid the conversation, your brain says exactly, not a speaker. And the loop continues. This is why some people study for 15 years and never feel fluent. Not because they lack skill, because their identity hasn't shifted. The people who break through, and I've seen this happen, it's remarkable when it does, they don't wait until they're fluent to call themselves English speakers. They make the identity shift first. They start saying internally and eventually externally, I am an English speaker. I'm not perfect, I'm still growing, but I am someone who speaks English. That's a different story, and your brain responds to it differently. It stops looking for evidence of failure. It starts looking for evidence of the new story. You start to notice, I had a full conversation today. Instead of, I made 3 mistakes today. Same reality, different filter, completely different trajectory. Part 7. Social anxiety versus language ability. Know the difference. Here's something very important and very overlooked. For some learners, what looks like a language problem is actually a social anxiety problem. And I don't mean that in a clinical, scary way. I mean that many people experience nervousness in social situations in their first language too, and English simply amplifies it. If you've ever felt awkward at a party in your own language, struggled to make small talk with people you don't know well, or found yourself going quiet in groups, that's not an English problem. That's a social comfort level, and studying more English vocabulary will not fix it. What helps is understanding that speaking English in a group is a social act, not a test. And the skills that help with social anxiety, breathing, grounding, realistic self-talk, exposure, are the same skills that help with English-speaking anxiety. The breathing thing, by the way, is not a cliche. It's physiology. When your amygdala fires, your breathing gets shallow. Shallow breathing confirms to your body that there is danger. It's a loop. Deep breathing, deliberately, even just 2 or 3 breaths, sends a signal back to your amygdala that says, actually, we're fine. The threat response begins to come down, the filter lifts, and language access comes back. So if you freeze in English conversations, try this. Before you speak, 1 breath, slow, from the belly, then speak. It sounds too simple. It works. Part 8. The Comfort Zone Trap and Why Most Advice About It Is Wrong. Everyone tells you to get out of your comfort zone. And yes, technically, growth happens outside it. But here's what no one explains. How far outside matters enormously. If you push yourself just slightly past your comfort zone, slightly uncomfortable, slightly challenging, but still manageable, your brain can learn. This is called the optimal anxiety zone, or the growth zone. If you push yourself way too far outside your comfort zone, into full panic, into situations where you feel completely lost and humiliated, your brain doesn't learn, it just gets traumatized, and next time it tries harder to avoid that situation. I've heard from so many learners who had one really bad experience, one presentation that went wrong, one conversation that was humiliating, one job interview that felt disastrous. And it set their English back significantly. Not their knowledge, their willingness to try. So, get out of your comfort zone needs to be calibrated. The right approach is gradual, deliberate expansion, not jumping off the deep end. Start with English conversations that have low stakes, voice messages to a friend, writing in a comment section, speaking to yourself while cooking, then move to slightly higher stakes, then higher, slowly. Each step expands your comfort zone, and each step makes the next one feel smaller. This is not timidity, this is smart neuroscience. Part 9. The 3 shifts that actually change everything. Okay, we've covered a lot of psychology. Let me now give you 3 very specific mental shifts, things you can actually start doing differently after this video ends. Shift 1. From correct to connected. Stop measuring your English by correctness. Start measuring it by connection. Did the other person understand you? Did you communicate what you meant? Did you move the conversation forward? If yes, that's a win. Even if you used the wrong tense, even if your accent is strong, even if you said, I am go to the shop instead of I'm going to the shop. Communication happened. That is the goal. The moment you shift your internal measurement from correctness to connection, the pressure drops. And when the pressure drops, the words come easier. This is not lowering your standards. This is choosing the standard that actually matters. Shift 2. From speaker to explorer. This one's subtle but powerful. When you frame yourself as an English speaker, there's an implied standard. Speakers speak. They're supposed to be good at it. When you frame yourself as an English explorer, different feeling entirely. Explorers discover, they encounter the unknown, they get it wrong sometimes, they find things they didn't expect. And all of that is part of the adventure, not a sign of failure. It's a tiny reframe. But it changes how your brain interprets difficulty. Difficulty stops being a threat and starts being part of the territory. Shift 3. From performance to presence. Most English learners are in performance mode when they speak. They're performing English at someone, trying to impress, trying to be correct, trying not to make mistakes. The people who speak most naturally are in presence mode. They're just there, in the conversation, interested in the other person, curious about what comes next, not monitoring themselves from the outside. The way to get into presence is actually to get interested, genuinely curious about the other person. What are they saying? What do they mean? What do I actually want to know? When you're genuinely curious, your brain is fully engaged with the conversation, not with self-evaluation. And when your brain is engaged outward instead of inward, language flows much more naturally. Try it next time. Ask a question you actually want to know the answer to, and notice what happens to your English. Part 10. What fluency actually feels like. I want to paint a picture for you because I think a lot of learners have the wrong image of fluency in their head. They imagine fluency as sounding like a native speaker, perfect pronunciation, no hesitation, no searching for words. That's not fluency, that's a native speaker. And even native speakers pause, self-correct, say and like, and you know what I mean, constantly. Real fluency, the kind that is actually available to you, the kind that will change your life, feels like this. You're in a conversation in English, and your attention is on the conversation, not on your language. The language is just happening, not perfectly, not always smoothly, but happening. You're thinking about what to say, not how to say it. When a word doesn't come, you find another way. When you make a mistake, you correct it or you don't, and either way, the conversation continues. That feeling of being in the conversation rather than watching yourself have the conversation, that is fluency. And it's not about vocabulary size, it's not about grammar accuracy. It's about your relationship with the act of speaking. When speaking English feels like something you're doing rather than something you're performing, that's the shift, and it's available to you. I promise you it's available. Part 11. The daily practice that rewires the psychology. Okay, practical, right now. What to actually do. 5 minutes a day, that's it. 5 minutes of what I call psychological immersion. Not studying, not grammar exercises, not vocabulary lists. Set a timer for 5 minutes and talk. Out loud, in English, alone, about anything. What you did today, what you're thinking about, what you're going to have for dinner, what you think about something you read or watched, your opinion on something, anything. Don't stop to correct yourself. Don't go back and fix mistakes. Just keep talking for 5 minutes, continuously. This feels weird, I know. It feels pointless. It might feel embarrassing even though you're alone. Do it anyway. What you're doing is training your brain to access English under the mild pressure of having to keep going. You're building the neural habit of reaching for the next word, the next phrase, even when it's imperfect. You're practicing presence without an audience, and after a few weeks, you'll notice something. The pauses get shorter. The reaching feels less effortful. The language starts to feel more like yours. This is not magic. This is neuroplasticity. This is your brain adapting to what you're asking it to do. 5 minutes, every day, out loud, no stopping to check. And then, once a week, have one English interaction that is slightly outside your comfort zone. One phone call, one voice message to someone you don't know well, one comment on an English-speaking platform, one more step. That's the whole system. It's not complicated, it's just consistent. And consistency, real, daily, small step consistency, is the only thing that actually rewires psychology. Closing. So let me bring this home. You've been told that you can't speak English because your vocabulary isn't big enough, or your grammar isn't accurate enough, or you haven't studied enough. And maybe those things are partly true. Maybe there's always more to learn. But the real reason, the deep reason, is psychological. It's the translation trap keeping you one step behind in every conversation. It's the affective filter shutting down your language access the moment you feel social pressure. It's the perfectionism prison making you judge yourself so hard that speaking feels like a test you're always failing. It's the identity story telling you that you're a learner, not a speaker. And your brain faithfully maintaining that story. These are the real reasons. And now that you know them, now that you can name them, they have less power over you. Because you are not bad at English. You are a person whose brain has learned, very effectively, to be afraid of speaking English. And that is not the same thing, not even close. Fear is learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. One conversation at a time, one breath before speaking, one shift from performance to presence, one day of talking to yourself for 5 minutes. That is how you get out of your head and into the language. That is how you go from someone who knows English to someone who lives in it. You already have more than you think you have. Now it's time to let it out. I'm your host. This is English After Midnight. If this hit something real for you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in this video, leave a comment below. Tell me which part was you. Tell me which shift you're going to try first. Subscribe, press the bell, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.